Welcome to today's story. Picture this. A classic neighborhood bar, maybe like your own local spot, where the day's worries kind of just melt away into that low hum of conversation.
Comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Now imagine there's this quiet man, maybe in a dimly lit corner. Someone who, carries himself with a certain knowingness,
Okay, got it. Seasoned.
Right. And then suddenly he's confronted by this swaggering figure, someone who thinks the streets just bend to his will.
The bully archetype.
Pretty much. So we're about to dive into a scene ripped right from that kind of place. It's a real collision, isn't it, between a life maybe lived with purpose, duty even.
And a present moment that's just poisoned by, bullying.
Intimidation.
Exactly. And what happens when a man who's really trying to keep a promise is faced with an injustice he feels he can't ignore?
Yeah, that's the crux of it.
It's a story about loyalty, maybe about what it truly means to be peaceful, and that moment when good people just decide, okay, enough is enough.
It sounds compelling. We think so. So, look, if this setup intrigues you, maybe give us a like, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives like this one.
Yeah, and drop a comment. Let us know what you think. Does this sound like your kind of story?
Right. Just leave a 1 if it does, maybe a 2 if it doesn't quite hit the mark for you. Your feedback really helps us figure out what you find fascinating.
Definitely.
Okay. Now, please listen to this story.
So what really jumped out at me right away in this story is how a really ordinary place, this bar O'Malley's, suddenly becomes the stage for this big clash. A clash of values, really.
O'Malley's, right. And we meet Jason there. A former Navy SEAL. And the place itself has weight, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's not just any bar. It was like a sanctuary for him and his late wife, Clara, especially during her illness. And the timing. This story mentions it would have been their 30th anniversary. That just adds this whole other layer, to why he wants peace, why he made that promise to Clara.
The promise to live a normal life, free from conflict.
Exactly. That's his mission, sort of.
But it's that commitment, that desire for normalcy that gets shattered pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Oh, instantly. Mike Cardini arrives with his crew, and the whole atmosphere just shifts.
Yeah, he sounds like almost a caricature, The local tough guy, expensive clothes, but still menacing.
Right, and the story doesn't just say he's menacing, it shows it. The way the other patrons react, how they hush up, try to avoid eye contact.
Yeah, it paints a picture, definitely. A community kind of living under this cloud of fear.
And what I found interesting was how specific it gets about Cardini's impact. It mentions this older guy, right, whose brother lost his restaurant.
Oh, yeah, that detail. And 2 other businesses, too. All because they didn't pay Cardini's insurance fees.
Exactly. It's not just background noise. It shows the real harm this guy is causing. It grounds the whole thing, gives weight to what happens next.
It really does. And you can almost feel Jason's internal struggle, can't you? He's trying so hard to honor Clara, to live peacefully.
But Cardini keeps pushing. It starts small, wanting Jason's usual spot at the bar, maybe a bit of posturing.
But then it escalates. He starts preying on the vulnerable ones. He targets Annie, the owner, and then that elderly couple just trying to sit in their booth. That felt like the real turning point, the blatant bullying.
I agree. That seems to be the catalyst. Witnessing that specific injustice, it makes Jason rethink things. He remembers Clara again.
But differently this time.
Yeah, he remembers her conviction, her belief that, standing up for people who can't defend themselves. That's not violence. That's just basic humanity.
Oh, so he's reinterpreting the promise.
Sort of, or maybe finding the deeper meaning in it. It's this tension, right, between his promise not to fight and this ingrained duty, this compassion Clara values so much. It raises that big question. Can you really have peace if you just let aggression run wild?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And once he makes that decision, that internal switch flips.
Wow.
It's incredibly swift and efficient. Cardini tries his usual intimidation tactics, insults, getting in his face.
And Jason is just calm, almost clinical in his response. You can just see the years of training kick in. Absolutely. The way he deals with that first enforcer, the description is so economical. Minimal movement, maximum effect.
What really stands out, though, is the control, right?
Totally. He's obviously capable of immense damage, but his actions aren't about that. They're about stopping the threat, incapacitating them, not causing lasting harm.
Like that subtle head movement to dodge the punch, the simple pivot that sends the other guy sprawling.
Even using the pool cue, it's defensive. It just shows this incredible discipline. It's not a brawl, it's
Yeah.
precision.
Yeah, it's a world away from Cardini's approach, which is
Yeah.
all just brute force and relying on fear.
Exactly. Jason's operating on a whole different level. Experience, skill, they trump raw aggression here. That moment, he deflects the switchblade
Effortless.
and then sweeps the legs of another attacker without even breaking a sweat, seemingly. It just highlights the massive gap between them in skill, but also in mindset.
And the climax. Cardini grabbing the broken beer bottle. It feels like pure desperation. His authority is just crumbling.
It really is. And Jason disarming him instantly, then demanding that public apology to Annie. That's crucial.
Why crucial? Just rubbing it in?
No, I don't think so. It's not just about winning the fight. It's about dismantling Cardini's power in front of the very people he terrorizes, making him acknowledge he was wrong publicly. That chips away at the fear itself.
Okay. That makes sense. It breaks the spell, sort of.
Exactly. And the effect is immediate. Cardini and his crew just retreat. It's more than just him losing face. It feels like a power shift in the whole neighborhood.
And you see that in the reactions, right? Annie's gratitude, the elderly couple thanking him. You feel the relief.
Yeah, the sense of liberation almost, like this cloud they were living under has lifted, at least for now.
So if we loop back to Jason's past, his background, that past defined by duty we mentioned at the start.
You can see how that Navy SEAL training, that whole ethos, probably instilled this deep sense of responsibility, protect the vulnerable.
So when the usual systems fail, maybe the police aren't effective against guys like Cardini. He steps in.
Right. Not because he wants violence, but because his sense of justice, maybe his sense of duty, demands it.
And leaving his contact info with Annie at the end. That feels significant too.
It does. It says this wasn't just a one-off. It suggests a continued willingness to stand with them, to offer support. It reinforces the idea that maybe normalcy, the life Clara wanted for him.
Maybe it isn't just about avoiding conflict.
Perhaps not always. Maybe it's about navigating conflict bravely when necessary, according to your values. Choosing the right battles, maybe? Honoring Clara's memory that way.
So that brings us back to you, the listener. What does all this deep dive into this pretty intense story leave us thinking about?
Well, it definitely makes you ponder what a normal life really means, doesn't it? Especially when you're faced with clear injustice.
Right. And how do you balance those personal promises, those commitments we make, with maybe a broader responsibility, to stand up for others when things go wrong?
It's complex. This story really highlights that complexity, I think, and also the impact, the really profound impact just one person can have when they decide to act.
So maybe the questions to carry with you are, what resonates most with you about Jason's choices? What would you have done?
Yeah, and what are the lines for you that you wouldn't let someone cross? Where do you draw your line in the sand?
Some powerful thoughts to mull over.
The amber lights of O'Malley's bar cast long shadows across the polished mahogany counter as the evening crowd buzzed with conversation. In the corner, a jazz quartet played soft melodies that floated above the clink of glasses. Jason Statham, a man whose withered face told stories of battles fought and won, sat quietly at the bar, nursing a $12 whiskey neat. His eyes alert yet distant surveyed the room with the practiced vigilance of someone who had spent decades assessing threats as a Navy SEAL. Though his muscular frame remained imposing at 57, there was a newfound gentleness to his movements, a man seeking peace after years of conflict. He twisted the wedding band still on his finger, remembering Clara's final words before cancer took her 6 months ago. "Promise me you'll try to live normally, Jason. The world needs good men who know when not to fight." Bartender Annie, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, slid another whiskey toward Jason with a knowing smile. "On the house," she whispered, her eyes briefly darting toward the entrance. Jason nodded appreciatively, not missing her subtle warning. The bar's atmosphere shifted instantly as the front door swung open, conversations dying mid-sentence like birds falling silent before a storm. Mike Cardini strode in, his expensive Italian suit failing to disguise the predator beneath. At 40, Mike's salt-and-pepper hair and designer stubble gave him the appearance of a successful businessman, but the cold calculation in his eyes told a different story. His reputation preceded him, the undisputed king of protection rackets in Lower Manhattan, a man who collected debts with broken bones instead of receipts. 4 men followed Mike inside, spreading out with practiced efficiency, burly enforcers with bulges under their jackets that weren't cell phones. Jason noticed how patrons averted their eyes or nervously checked their watches, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. Mike's presence commanded the room without a word being spoken, the air growing thick with tension as he surveyed his domain. His gaze eventually fell on Jason, who sat comfortably on the corner Barstool Mike's regular spot. A flash of irritation crossed Mike's face, his jaw clenching momentarily before morphing into a predatory smile. He whispered something to his lieutenant, a hulking man with brass knuckles tattooed across his fingers, who nodded and chuckled darkly. As Mike began making his way toward the bar, Jason took another sip of whiskey, his posture relaxed but eyes sharpening with focus. The evening's peaceful reflection was about to be interrupted, and Jason could feel the familiar tingle of adrenaline beginning to course through his veins, a sensation he hadn't welcomed since hanging up his uniform. Jason traced the rim of his whiskey glass, his mind drifting to Clara. It had been precisely 6 months since cancer took her 6 months of quiet evenings and empty conversations with her memory. This neighborhood bar had been their special place during her remission, a small celebration of life continuing against the odds. "Promise me you'll find joy again," she'd whispered during those final hospital days, her fingers intertwined with his. Tonight marked what would have been their 30th anniversary, and he'd chosen this bar deliberately, seeking some connection to her spirit in a world that felt increasingly hollow without her steady presence. Annie, the bar's 65-year-old owner, slid another napkin under Jason's drink, her weathered hands trembling slightly. Her eyes, lined with the wisdom of decades, carried a heaviness Jason recognized immediately fear. As she leaned closer, whiskey and honey in her hushed voice, "You picked a rough night to visit us, honey." Before she could elaborate, the door to her small office swung open and Mike emerged, casually counting a stack of bills. Annie's shoulders instantly tensed, her professional smile faltering as she retreated to serve other customers. Across the room, patrons exchanged knowing glances. "That's Mike Cardini," a gray-haired man muttered to his companion at a nearby table. "Used to be small time, but now he owns half the neighborhood. 3 businesses closed last month for not paying his insurance fees." His drinking partner nodded grimly. "My brother's restaurant was one of them. 40 years in business, gone in a week after he refused to pay." Jason's attention shifted to the corner booth, where Mike's henchmen surrounded an elderly couple. The woman, perhaps in her late 70s, clutched her husband's arm as one thug leaned menacingly over their table. "This section costs extra tonight, $200 for premium seating." The old man reached for his wallet with shaking hands, dignity crumbling under intimidation. His wife's eyes glistened with unshed tears of humiliation. A familiar tightness gripped Jason's chest, the sensation he'd known in combat when innocent lives hung in the balance. Clara's voice echoed in his mind. "Promise me you'll live normally, Jason, no more fights." It had been her dying wish, knowing how violence had haunted him after his service. But as he watched the elderly couple's distress, another memory surfaced: Clara volunteering at the senior center, fiercely defending her elderly friends against a dismissive administrator. "Standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves isn't violence," she'd told him proudly. "It's humanity." Jason set his glass down firmly, his inner conflict resolving into quiet determination. Some promises were meant to be kept. Others, he realized, might need reinterpretation when faced with clear injustice. Mike Cardini purposefully weaved through the crowded bar, his eyes locked on Jason with predatory focus. As he approached, Mike deliberately bumped Jason's elbow, sending the amber liquid splashing across the polished mahogany. The $12 whiskey dripped onto Jason's sleeve as a hush fell over the immediate vicinity. Mike's lip curled into a sneer, his voice carrying just enough to ensure nearby patrons could hear the confrontation brewing. "You're in my seat, old man." His tone was flat, devoid of any genuine emotion beyond contempt. "I don't see reservations on bar stools in America," Jason replied calmly, dabbing at his sleeve with a napkin Annie hastily provided. Jason's eyes briefly met Annie's worried gaze as he turned to face Mike fully. "Let me buy you a drink instead," Jason offered, gesturing to the empty stool beside him. "The bar's got plenty of room for everyone." His voice carried the measured patience of a man who had diffused countless volatile situations, each word carefully chosen to avoid escalation. Mike's men exchanged glances, momentarily thrown by Jason's unexpected diplomacy. Mike, however, interpreted the peace offering as weakness, exactly the response he'd been hoping for. His confidence swelled as he leaned in closer, the expensive cologne he wore failing to mask the whiskey on his breath. "Look at you," Mike scoffed, voice dripping with disdain. "Gray hair, wrinkles, probably can't even climb stairs without getting winded. What are you, pushing 60? This isn't a retirement home." The insults washed over Jason, each one landing but not penetrating as his mind briefly flashed back to his SEAL training. The endless hours in freezing water, instructors screaming inches from his face, learning that true strength wasn't about reacting but choosing when to react. Breathe in. Assessment. Threat level, options, breathe out. The familiar rhythm of crisis evaluation anchored him as Mike continued his verbal assault. Annie's knuckles whitened around the glass she was drying, her eyes darting to the phone behind the counter. She'd seen this pattern before. Mike's intimidation tactics rarely ended with just words. Jason noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor and the way other patrons were quietly gathering belongings, preparing for a hasty exit. The elderly couple from earlier had already disappeared, likely through the back door that staff used for smoke breaks. Mike's 4 lieutenants had methodically repositioned themselves, creating a roughly 10-foot circle around Jason's barstool. The trap was closing. "Stand up," Mike demanded, his patience evaporating. "I want you to look me in the eye when I teach you about respect." One of the thugs cracked his knuckles for emphasis, the sound artificially loud in the now quiet space. Jason remained seated, his voice steady as he offered one final path toward peace. "Sometimes the strongest man is the one who walks away," he said, making direct eye contact with Mike. "This doesn't need to go any further." For a fleeting moment, something like uncertainty flickered across Mike's face, an animal instinct warning of danger beneath the calm exterior. But pride in an audience of expectant followers demanded action. Mike's jaw set with determination as he placed a heavy hand on Jason's shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Your choice, old-timer. Walk out on your feet or get carried out. Clock's ticking." The tension in the room had become almost tangible, a crackling energy that warned of imminent violence. Jason's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes, those eyes that had witnessed the worst of humanity on battlefields across the world, hardened imperceptibly as he realized diplomacy had reached its limits. Mike Cardini leaned in closer, his breath hot against Jason's ear as he delivered the words that would cross the final line. "After I'm done with you, old-timer, I think I'll pay Annie a special visit. Maybe check in on those grandkids of hers too. The little girl starts kindergarten next week, right?" The cruel smile playing across his lips revealed yellowed teeth as his eyes flicked toward Annie, who stood frozen behind the bar, color draining from her face. Something imperceptible shifted in Jason's demeanor, not a movement, but a stillness that seemed to change the air around him. His eyes, once calm pools of restraint, hardened into granite as an internal switch flipped from defense to offense. The patrons who had been watching sensed it too. Several backed away instinctively, like animals detecting an approaching storm. "You shouldn't have said that," Jason remarked, his voice dropping an octave, each word measured and deliberate. Mike, misreading the change as fear, grinned wider and shoved Jason's shoulder hard. "What are you gonna do about it, Grandpa?" The physical contact, that first aggressive touch, marked the point of no return. Jason's military-trained mind cataloged every detail in microseconds. 4 men positioned in a loose semicircle, the bulge of a knife in the left pocket of the lieutenant with the tattooed neck, 2 patrons still trapped near the hallway to the restrooms, Annie within reaching distance of the silent alarm. 17 years of special operations had taught him to read rooms like books, identifying threats and exits before most people had taken their first breath in a new environment. The tattooed lieutenant, interpreting a subtle nod from Mike, lunged forward with a haymaker aimed at Jason's temple, a knockout punch designed to end the confrontation in a single blow. With a fluidity that seemed impossible for a man his age, Jason tilted his head 2 inches to the right. The fist whistled past his ear, carrying its owner forward by momentum. Jason's hand shot up, gripped the man's wrist, and redirected his motion with a simple pivot that sent the lieutenant crashing face first into the bar with a sickening crack. The man crumpled to the floor, blood streaming from his broken nose. The entire exchange had taken less than 2 seconds. A collective gasp swept through the bar. Annie's eyes widened with recognition as she instinctively reached for the phone. A woman in the corner whispered, "Holy shit, did you see that?" Mike stared in disbelief at his lieutenant moaning on the floor, embarrassment and rage contorting his features. "What the hell are you idiots waiting for?" he snarled at his remaining men. "Take this old bastard down." The 3 enforcers exchanged uncertain glances before advancing simultaneously, brass knuckles slipping onto fingers, a switchblade flicking open with a metallic snap. As Jason settled into a subtle fighting stance, weight balanced, hands relaxed but ready, a voice that sounded remarkably like Clara's whispered in his mind, "Violence isn't the answer, Jason." He allowed himself a brief, bittersweet smile, but sometimes, he acknowledged silently, it's the only language bullies understand. His eyes moved methodically between his attackers, calculating trajectories, weaknesses, the optimal sequence. Mike backed away slightly, suddenly unsure about the predator he had awakened. For a suspended moment, perhaps 3 seconds, but feeling much longer, complete silence engulfed the bar. Glasses stopped clinking, breathing seemed to pause. The jazz quartet saxophonist held a note halfway through exhale. It was the pregnant stillness before lightning strikes, that electric moment when everyone in the room realized simultaneously that they were about to witness something extraordinary and terrifying. Jason inhaled slowly, centering himself as the 3 men tensed to spring. The storm was about to break. What happened next unfolded with such breathtaking speed that witnesses would later struggle to describe it coherently. Jason moved with fluid precision, like water finding the path of least resistance. As the first 2 attackers lunged forward simultaneously, Jason sidestepped gracefully, causing them to collide with each other. Without pausing, he grabbed a pool cue from the nearby table and used it to deflect the switchblade that the tattooed lieutenant had pulled during the commotion. The wooden stick cracked against the man's wrist, sending the blade clattering across the floor as its owner howled in pain. The 4th attacker, a burly man with brass knuckles, swung wildly at Jason's head. Jason ducked beneath the blow, the attacker's momentum carrying him forward as Jason swept his legs with a precise kick. The man crashed into a table of abandoned drinks, sending colorful cocktails splashing across his designer shirt. Each movement from Jason was economical, nothing wasted, nothing excessive, the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that survival depended on precision rather than power. He never struck to maim, only to incapacitate, his decades of training evident in how he targeted pressure points and balance centers rather than causing permanent damage. Mike Cardini stood frozen, disbelief etched across his face as his once fearsome crew lay sprawled around the bar, groaning or stunned into silence. His eyes darted between his fallen men and Jason, who now stood calmly in the center of the devastation, barely breathing hard. "Who the hell are you?" Mike whispered, reaching behind him to grasp a broken beer bottle from the bar counter. His knuckles whitened around the jagged glass as desperation replaced his earlier arrogance. With a primal yell, he lunged forward, the makeshift weapon slashing toward Jason's face. The bottle never reached its target. In one seamless motion, Jason caught Mike's wrist mid-swing, twisted sharply, and used the momentum to spin the gang leader around. Before anyone could blink, Mike found himself bent painfully over the bar counter, his arm locked behind him at an angle that threatened dislocation with the slightest additional pressure. Jason leaned in close, his voice low but clear enough for the stunned onlookers to hear. "Apologize to Annie, now." Mike struggled futilely against the iron grip before gasping out, "I'm sorry, Annie, I'm sorry." A collective gasp rippled through the bar as patrons witnessed the unthinkable, the neighborhood's most feared man reduced to stammering apologies. Annie stood behind the bar, her hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes at the sight of her tormentor finally facing consequences. The elderly couple from the corner booth had returned and watched with undisguised satisfaction. For years, these people had lived under Mike's shadow of intimidation, and in the span of 60 seconds, Jason had shattered that power completely. The aftermath hung in the air like a thunderclap's echo. Mike Cardini scrambled backward toward the exit, his previously immaculate suit now rumpled and stained with spilled liquor. His men, though still conscious, dragged their injured comrades through the door, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. "This isn't over," Mike muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The threat sounded hollow, like air escaping a punctured balloon. Jason didn't bother to watch them leave. Instead, he straightened his jacket and returned to his barstool, uncomfortable with the stares of admiration from the remaining patrons. Annie approached with a fresh whiskey, her hands no longer trembling. "On the house, hell, on the house forever," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "That man's been terrorizing this neighborhood for 3 years. The cops are in his pocket. Nobody dared stand up to him." Jason nodded silently, his eyes briefly meeting those of the elderly couple who had returned to their corner booth. The old man raised his glass in a silent toast of gratitude. "Why did you help us?" Annie asked quietly, leaning across the bar. "Most people just look away." Jason traced the rim of his glass, remembering Clara's voice. "The world needs good men who know when not to fight and when to stand their ground." He smiled faintly. "Bullies only thrive when good people convince themselves it's safer to stay silent." The weight of the wedding band on his finger felt suddenly lighter, as if Clara would have approved. The elderly man from the corner booth approached, his wife's hand tucked securely in the crook of his arm. "Young man," he said, his voice weathered but firm, "at our age, we've seen enough to know that standing for what's right never goes out of style." He extended a hand that bore the calluses of decades of honest work. "I served in Vietnam, thought my fighting days were over. Thank you for reminding me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is bear witness." As the night wound down, Jason scribbled his number on a napkin and slid it to Annie. "If he comes back, call me." Annie nodded, understanding the weight of the gesture. "You know," she said, studying his face, "true strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's knowing when to hit and when to walk away. That kind of wisdom only comes with time." Jason stepped out into the night, the cool air balm against his skin. He glanced at Clara's photo on his phone one last time before slipping it into his pocket. Perhaps honoring her memory wasn't about avoiding conflict after all. It was about choosing the right battles, the necessary ones. As he walked away from O'Malley's bar, a sense of peace settled over him. Life's greatest victories, he realized, often come from battles we never planned to fight but couldn't walk away from. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Clara had meant all along.